In 1944, Universal took its three greatest monsters, Dracula, the Wolfman, and Frankenstein's Monster, and threw them together into one reckless, supernatural collision. What they created wasn't just a crossover, it was a behind-the-scenes nightmare of fires, recycled screams, near-fatal stunts, and one of the strangest animation crossovers in horror history. Tonight, we're opening the casket on the bizarre, dangerous, and deeply strange making of House of Frankenstein. Fact 1. Dracula's transformation was animated. The shadowy Dracula to bat transformation in House of Frankenstein wasn't created by a horror effects unit at all. It was animated by Walter Lantz, the man behind Woody Woodpecker. During wartime production, Universal outsourced specialty animation work, and Lantz's studio handled the bat silhouette transition used for John Carradine's Dracula. At the time, animation departments were often repurposed for everything from military training films to theatrical effects, and Universal quietly took advantage of that pipeline. It's one of the strangest creative crossovers in classic cinema history. The same artist responsible for one of animation's most chaotic cartoon icons quietly crafted one of Universal Horror's most gothic visual moments. A cartoon pioneer giving motion to a vampire's escape into the night. The contrast between slapstick animation and gothic terror could not be more extreme, yet the result blends seamlessly on screen. Most audiences have no idea a children's cartoon legend helped animate one of Dracula's most eerie exits. It's a hidden collaboration that perfectly reflects the strange wartime improvisation happening behind the scenes at Hollywood studios. Fact 2. Glenn Strange nearly burned alive. For the film's fiery climax, the production used real flames and laid down tumbleweeds to spread the fire quickly across the set. What the crew underestimated was just how violently fast tumbleweeds ignite. As the fire raced toward him out of control, Glenn Strange, fully suited as the monster, was nearly trapped in the blaze. The heat intensified in seconds, and the heavy costume made escape even more dangerous. Crew members rushed in with extinguishers as the flames surged beyond safety levels. Strange escaped with only minor burns, but the moment terrified everyone on set and immediately halted filming. This wasn't a staged near miss for publicity. This was a genuine accident that could have ended the monster legacy forever. Several crew members later recalled thinking they were witnessing a fatal stunt gone wrong. The danger you see in the final scene is completely real. Fact 3. The monster was wearing Lon Chaney Jr.'s face. In the icy laboratory scenes, the frozen monster lying beneath glass is not Glenn Strange at all. It's a dummy wearing Lon Chaney Jr.'s face. Universal reused Chaney's life mask from The Ghost of Frankenstein to save money on props. Studios frequently reused molds and prosthetics during wartime shortages, but few were as unsettling as this one. This means that Glenn Strange is literally acting beside a lifeless replica of the actor who played the monster before him. In one of the franchise's strangest visual layers, two Frankenstein performers share the same body. One alive, one molded in rubber. It's an unintentional meta moment created purely by budget efficiency. Today, it stands as one of the creepiest production shortcuts in classic horror history. Even longtime fans are often stunned when they realize whose face they've been staring at in that frozen close-up. Fact 4. Glenn Strange was banned from the cafeteria. While filming in full monster makeup, Glenn Strange was barred from entering Universal's studio cafeteria. Executives worried his appearance would disturb stars and visitors during meals. Instead, Strange was given paper sack lunches and made to eat alone between takes. Studio publicity departments in the 1940s carefully protected glamorous star images, and a shambling monster at lunchtime didn't fit the illusion. The actor later joked that Universal didn't want their leading ladies losing their appetites over mashed potatoes and a scarred giant. But behind the humor, the isolation was real. Even off-screen, Frankenstein's monster was treated like an outcast. Strange often ate on set or in costume rooms separated from the social center of the lot. The makeup that made him famous also quietly separated him from the rest of the cast. Fact 5. Boris Karloff's scream was recycled. When the hunchback Daniel screams as he falls to his death, audiences are not hearing actor J. Carroll Naish at all. The scream was reused from Boris Karloff's performance in Son of Frankenstein, lifted directly from Universal's sound archive. Sound libraries were closely guarded studio assets, and screams, thunder, and monster roars were recycled constantly to save time and money. Audio recycling was common in Golden Age Hollywood, but the reuse of Karloff's voice is especially eerie, his presence still haunting the franchise even after he had passed the monster role to another actor. The studio treated sound effects like stock footage long before the digital era. As a result, Karloff's scream became an uncredited ghost echoing through another monster's death. Even without appearing on screen, his voice still shaped the emotional tone of the moment. Fact 6. Karloff coached his replacement. Even after leaving the role, Boris Karloff personally coached Glenn Strange on how to play Frankenstein's monster. After hours away from the cameras, Karloff showed Strange how to move, how to breathe beneath the heavy makeup, and how to convey emotion through stillness instead of dialogue. He emphasized posture, pacing, and the subtle sadness that made the monster tragic instead of purely frightening. Karloff understood the monster better than anyone alive at that point, and he wanted his successor to succeed. Yet years later, Karloff admitted he was ultimately dissatisfied with Strange's portrayal, saying Strange wasn't as lucky as I was. It was a rare moment of mentorship mixed with quiet disappointment. Karloff had benefited from top-tier scripts and directors earlier in the franchise. The man who created the monster was now watching someone else inherit his shadow at a very different stage in Universal's horror era. Fact 7. One theater ran an all-night screening. When House of Frankenstein opened at New York City's Rialto Theater on December 15, 1944, demand was so intense that the theater ran the film all night without stopping. Audiences packed in continuously, creating a non-stop monster marathon that stretched until morning. Late-night horror screenings were still a novelty at the time, making the turnout even more remarkable. The film then continued its run for 3 straight weeks, proving that even during wartime, horror audiences craved escapism through monsters and mayhem. Despite critical skepticism, ticket sales were explosive. Universal's gamble on a crossover paid off immediately at the box office. The monsters were no longer just characters, they were an event. Moviegoers weren't just watching a film, they were lining up for a spectacle. Fact 8. Dracula was recast at the last minute. John Carradine was not Universal's first choice to play Dracula in House of Frankenstein. The role underwent last-minute casting changes as schedules shifted and contracts collapsed during wartime production. Universal needed a fast replacement who could deliver elegance, menace, and professionalism with almost no preparation time. Carradine stepped into the role under extreme time pressure, with minimal rehearsal and little opportunity to develop a unique interpretation of the Count. His Dracula performance was shaped entirely by instinct rather than long preparation. This rush casting explains why his portrayal feels so different from both Bela Lugosi and the later Universal interpretations. The Prince of Darkness was summoned in a hurry, and it shows on screen in subtle, fascinating ways. Fact 9. Shakespeare was recited on set. Between takes on set, John Carradine often entertained cast and crew by reciting Shakespeare from memory. In full Dracula costume, he would suddenly break into passages from Hamlet, Macbeth, or King Lear. Carradine had an encyclopedic memory for classical verse and treated these moments as informal stage performances. The atmosphere would shift instantly, from gothic horror to classical theater in the span of a breath. Carradine was a trained stage actor who took immense pride in Shakespearean performance. The image is surreal. Dracula himself delivering royal soliloquies beside fog machines and monster makeup chairs. Crew members often paused work just to listen. It's one of the most cultured moments ever hidden inside a B-movie horror production. Fact 10. The Wolfman was also the caterer. Between takes, Lon Chaney Jr. frequently cooked elaborate meals for fellow cast members in his dressing room. The same man who transformed into a tortured werewolf on screen would suddenly become the catering department off-camera. Cast members recalled him preparing full spreads, not just snacks, but genuine home-style meals. Cooking was one of Chaney's quiet passions, a calming contrast to the emotional intensity he brought to the Wolfman. food became a form of stress relief for him during long shooting days. On a set filled with screams and fire, he fed the monsters between takes. It's one of the warmest human details hidden inside a very dark production. Fact 11. Elena Verdugo's scream was too real to dub. During production, Universal routinely used a professional scream actress to dub female screams across multiple horror films for consistency. Elena Verdugo, who played the gypsy Ilanka, was originally expected to be dubbed like every other actress in distress scenes. This anonymous scream performer appeared in dozens of Universal releases without ever being credited. But when the editors reviewed her recorded takes, they realized her scream was so raw and convincing that they left it completely untouched. She outperformed the studio's own scream specialist and became one of the few actresses in the Universal Monster cycle whose real scream made it into the final cut. Her terror wasn't manufactured in a sound booth. It was captured live on set and preserved forever on film. The authenticity gave her scenes a visceral edge rarely achieved in dubbed performances. Fact 12. The studio didn't want a blonde gypsy. Elena Verdugo was naturally blonde, but Universal executives refused to allow a blonde gypsy on screen. They forced her to wear a dark wig because it better fit their rigid, stereotyped idea of what a gypsy should look like in 1940s Hollywood. Studio image control was absolute, and performers had little say in how they were visually presented. Verdugo didn't just act the role, she also choreographed her own dance sequence, performing barefoot on a rocky set littered with sharp stones. There were no protective mats, no stunt doubles, and no second takes for bruises. Several takes left her feet bleeding between shots. The studio controlled her appearance, but the entire physical performance was her own. The elegance you see on screen was earned through real pain. Fact 13. The monster only appears for about 5 minutes. Despite the title and billing, Frankenstein's Monster is on screen for only about 5 minutes in the entire film. Most of that time is spent frozen in ice or lying motionless on a laboratory table. For a movie called House of Frankenstein, the monster is almost a guest star in his own home. The limited screen time was the result of tight budgets and compressed production schedules during wartime. Rather than build the story around the monster, Universal structured the film as a revolving parade of villains. The result is one of the strangest ironies in horror history, a Frankenstein film where Frankenstein barely moves. Audiences came for the monster, but stayed for the spectacle of the crossover. Fact 14. Glenn Strange was paid like a supporting actor, not a star. Glenn Strange's exact salary for House of Frankenstein has never been publicly documented. Universal Pictures did not release payroll records for its 1940s horror films, and biographers confirm that Strange's contracts were modest compared to stars like Boris Karloff or Lon Chaney Jr. Based on standard industry pay at the time, Strange almost certainly earned only a few $100s per week, while top-tier horror stars commanded several thousand. At the time, Karloff routinely earned between $3,000 and $5,000 weekly, while working character actors typically made between $100 and $400. Despite enduring brutal makeup hours, physical strain, and dangerous stunts as the monster, Strange remained classified as a supporting player on the payroll. Ironically, his real financial success came much later through steady television work on Gunsmoke, not from the iconic role that defined his horror legacy. Fact 15. Dracula's mustache disappears between shots. In the scene where Dracula's carriage crashes, a sharp-eyed continuity error reveals that part of John Carradine's mustache disappears between shots. In wide shots, it's intact, but in the close-up, one side is noticeably missing. It's a blink and you'll miss it moment, but once you see it, it's impossible to unsee. The error slipped through final edits at a time when reshoots were expensive, and wartime film stock was tightly rationed. Universal chose to release the scene as is rather than correct it. Even the Prince of Darkness wasn't immune to grooming mishaps in the golden age of horror. For attentive viewers, it's a small but charming imperfection preserved in celluloid. Fact 16. No Frankenstein family member appears. House of Frankenstein is the first Universal Frankenstein film with no member of the Frankenstein family appearing on screen. No Baron, no descendant, No ancestral legacy guiding the story, just the monster himself, revived and exploited once again. The family that wants to find the moral core of the series is completely absent. In earlier entries, the Frankenstein name always carried moral weight and scientific consequence. Here, that lineage vanishes completely. The monster becomes a wandering object rather than a creation tied to a specific bloodline. It marks a turning point where the character fully transitions from tragic experiment to franchise property. From this point forward, the monster belongs more to the studio than to any story of creation. Fact 17. The Wolfman never howls. Out of the 5 films featuring Lon Chaney Jr. as the Wolfman, House of Frankenstein is the only one in which the Wolfman never howls, growls, or roars. The iconic cry that defined the character is completely absent from the film's soundscape. The absence was not a creative choice, it was largely a budget and sound design shortcut. By 1944, Universal was cutting corners aggressively due to wartime constraints. The silence strips the Wolfman of one of his most iconic traits, making this version feel strangely muted and restrained. For longtime fans, it's an eerie omission that subtly changes the emotional impact of the character. Fact 18. It was originally called The Devil's Brood. Early in development, the film was titled The Devil's Brood, and the original story drafts envisioned a much larger monster ensemble. Planned appearances included the Mummy, the Ape Woman, the Mad Ghoul, and possibly even the Invisible Man. Early concept sketches and outlines reveal a full-scale monster convergence event. Budget cuts and production limitations ultimately forced the studio to scale the film down to just 3 monsters. What remains on screen is only a fragment of Universal's original crossover ambition. House of Frankenstein could have been the very first full monster cinematic universe, decades before the term even existed. History narrowly missed out on a much larger nightmare. Fact 19. Most of the score was actually original. Unlike many Universal horror films of the era that recycled music across productions, House of Frankenstein featured a largely original musical score. The soundtrack was composed primarily by Hans J. Salter, with additional contributions from Paul Dessau and Charles Previn. These composers were responsible for shaping the emotional intensity of countless Universal horror classics. This was highly unusual for a 1944 B-feature horror film. Most studios relied heavily on pre-existing music libraries to save money. The decision to commission fresh compositions elevated the film's atmosphere and gave the crossover its own unique sonic identity. Even as budgets tightened, Universal still invested in making the monsters sound new. The music helped bind the disparate creatures into a unified world. Fact 20. Critics hated it, but audiences loved it. Upon release, critics were brutally dismissive of House of Frankenstein. Film historian Gregory W. Mank later noted that reviewers made mincemeat of the movie. Contemporary reviews labeled it more ludicrous than terrifying and mocked it as no more frightening than the house that Jack built. Yet despite the critical scorn, the film performed strongly at the box office. Audiences showed up in massive numbers for the sheer spectacle of seeing their favorite monsters share the screen. Critics scoffed, but ticket sales told a very different story. In the end, it was public fascination, not critical approval, that kept Universal's monster legacy alive. The monsters survived because the audience refused to let them die. It was a chaos experiment held together by fire, rubber, recycled screams, and pure cinematic ambition. If you love uncovering the hidden history behind horror's greatest legends, hit that like button, subscribe for more deep dive monster documentaries, and tell us in the comments which fact shocked you the most. And remember, some houses were never meant to hold more than one monster at a time.